The secret to commanding a 40% premium over competitors in your self-storage market. And how can you have a full-time job as a professional and still own self-storage? This week on the Stories Behind the Door podcast, the founder, president, CEO of Storage Authority, Marc Goodin. Hello, I'm your host, Thaddeus Campbell, Director of Business Development Strategic Branding for S3 Partners. 30 years, 300 plus ground up developments in storage, small bay flex, and boat and RV. We can help bring your deal to life. Very excited today to welcome my guest. I'm going to get to him in a second. I'm going to give a quick shout out to my friends at Kiwi 2 Construction, been incredible supporters of the show, allowing us to bring these great conversations within storage to everybody in the industry. Wayne Woolsey and his team, 30 plus years of steel buildings. Very grateful for them supporting the show. With no further ado, he is Marc Goodin, CEO and president of Storage Authority. They've got a really cool setup and a really cool way they go about storage. Really excited to dive into how they operate in the self-storage space. So first and foremost, Marc, thanks for coming and joining the show.
My pleasure. I always love to talk self-storage, and I know you've got great experience, and so it's going to be fun.
Very much appreciate it. I always start the podcast off the same way. I find this to be such a unique business. I came into it very late in life. I was 48, 49 years old when I got into the industry. And it's so different than anything else I've ever experienced as far as people, the kindness that exists in the industry, the way people interact. So always fascinated because I'd never even heard of it before. And so fascinated for the journey of how people even found self-storage. How did Marc Goodin even get into this industry?
Well, I got in the mid 1980s. I was a young civil engineer, designing Walmarts and Dunkin' Donuts and whatnot. And a developer came to our engineering office and asked if I designed a self-storage for him. I said, absolutely. What is a self-storage? I'm 25 years old. I didn't even know what self-storage was back then. He showed me an example, and over the years I designed 3 or 4 for this one gentleman, and that's how I originally got started in self-storage.
When you initially get into it, of course in the 1980s, not a common industry at all. Like, it wasn't like there was an extra space in a public storage on every corner. What was the opportunity like back then when developers were looking at new facilities?
Well, first of all, it was much easier back then, the development process, because there wasn't a lot around. People, didn't have that feeling, maybe there's too much demand. So if you had a piece of property back then, it didn't have to be on a main street. It could be anywhere. Now that we're mainstream, there's a lot of different situations that you got to be prepared for. So, but back then you could build them and they would come. It was simple as that. And it was easy to get them approved.
That's such a great segue into the next question I want to ask you, which is, we're first couple weeks of 2026. Today's the first day of the second full week, and it's a very different environment than we've seen, certainly in my time in the last 5 years that I've been in the industry. For you, you've been in the industry for far longer than I have, longer than a lot of people have. How different is it today relative to what you've seen in your career in storage?
Well, there's been a lot of up and downs in the economy, in the last 20, 30 years. So self-storage is always evolving. Like I said, build it and they will come. Then it was build it in the right location and then they will come. And now is build it in the right location, make sure there's demand there, and make sure you're going to do the marketing of the facility and they will come. So you've seen that all go through. And I was just reading recently how I think it was up in Vail, and they were talking about the high prices of houses now, but they went back in history and it was always high prices of houses, but 5 years later, they were worth double and triple. It's the same for self-storage. There's a lot of fear out there right now, and it's the fear of missing out, and it's the fear of failure. And so the fear of failure is extremely high right now for everybody, not just self-storage, because of the high interest rates, because of the politics and whatnot. But I see right now it's a little bit harder, but that means it's a little bit easier for the rest of us willing to put in the effort. So I'm excited about 2026. It's certainly going to be better than 2025, which was, one of the slowest years in a long time.
I love that you said that. As we're taping this, yesterday was the New York Self Storage Association Investment Forum up in New York City. I happened to be lucky enough to go up there, and the sentiment was, to your point, like we were hearing words like scary. A lot of talk about the amount of debt that's outstanding, and so to your point, I guess the question I want to ask you, is it a good thing that that fear is out there? Obviously in 18, 19, then post COVID 22, 23, we saw this mad rush of development. Is that fear good for folks like you that are established and have a long time in the industry to see maybe some of those other people not coming in such a hurry to go build new storage?
Well, I think it's good for the whole industry because what's happened in the past, maybe there was 100,000 square feet of self storage in a town, and a developer would come in and build another 100,000 with no research. And we've seen that happen. Now the banks are smarter, the people are smarter, the apps are out there to see what's in the pipeline and whatnot. So, I think that there's less risk now, because there's just not people going to just put that kind of money down without doing research. Like, you're going to build a business that's going to turn into a $20 million business. You should do some research before you get started. And so I think that's a very good thing, that fear. And likewise, when things slow down, a lot of the people get out of the business that really weren't that good at it. Some contractors are no longer building self-storage. But the reason they're getting out is, it's just like home builders. When you have that recession, sometimes there's a layer that gets out of the business and makes the business that much easier and with less risk. But I think it's a great opportunity right now, compared to many years in the past.
I want to get into the storage authority structure and what you guys have set up and how your business model is framed, because I think it's brilliant, quite frankly. I want to ask one more question about this because you brought something up that was a theme that came up yesterday and it's come up in the last few conferences that I've been to, which is the importance of being a good storage operator in 2026. Like maybe in 1985, 1995, 2005, you could get away with not really operating it at a high level as a business because there was so much demand. Take me through 2025, the franchises, the locations that you guys run. How important is it today to really understand operations?
Well, operations is important. But what I'm going to say is sales and marketing is more important. So operations is important so you have the time. You've got to have the high touch, high tech, the technology, so emails go out when the rent's late and people can pay from that email or text automatically. Um, but you really have to have that sales and marketing attitude because every year, and it's going to continue. Self storage is going to cost more to build. And when you're the new guy in the block, the old guys in the block, half the people out there have $1 million to $2 million mortgage on their 80,000 square foot self storage. Well, the new guy is going to have a much higher mortgage, so he's got to be extremely good at sales and marketing. And sales and marketing is such a big topic. That means there's not a speck of dust on your site. People say, they got to look around and say, this is remarkably clean. They got to, when I say remarkably, that means they're going to tell their friends how clean it is. And, the big REITs, we have the ability to move much faster than the large companies. So that's why I see it as a good opportunity right now, because we have the opportunity to switch from Tuesday to Wednesday, where these big operators take from January to July to change a pattern. So we have that opportunity if we own one, two, or three self storages. So sales and marketing and operations are critical. And self storage is one business that has the worst operations and sales and marketing. The things that I see you would not see in any other business. And that's just because we're making so much money. The owners don't say, you really can't wear shoes and flip flops to work. They don't say that to their owners. They don't pay attention. But if you do pay attention, you can make 30% more than your competition. And that's what you need to make sometimes in some locations in order to pay the new construction costs.
Fascinating. And I'm going to get into technology. I'm going to come back to that topic that you sort of brought up about how important it is now to be operating at a high level. The thing that you brought up that I really want to dive into, this idea of the REITs have achieved such scale that it's challenging for them. The reason I say technology is because the adoption when you're a smaller operator can happen a little quicker than if you're trying to implement it in 4,000 stores like Extra Space operates. But I promised I'm going to get into Storage Authority. And I really want to go down this road because you guys have a very unique structure to what you do in developing new self storage facilities. So, talk to me a little bit about A, how did you even come up with the idea for Storage Authority? And what does that look like? What's the operating maxim that you guys use to get these facilities built?
Well, how I got started is kind of a really funny story. I retired when I was 50 years old. When I owned my engineering business, I saw the only guys that were going out to party after they came to meet me and talk about their project was the self storage guys. And so eventually I built my first self storage, and I retired from my engineering company that I owned, and it was just incredible to retire, and I would get one or two clients a year that I would help out. This one guy gave me a call. His name was Scott House, and he said, well, I bought all the courses. I went to the seminars. I went to everything, but it's still not right. It's still not that easy. Will you help me? Will you be my mentor? And I said, absolutely. It's $200 an hour. Let's go for it. After 2 months, he came to me. He says, Mark, everything you're telling me about self-storage, you could tell the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. You can kind of see there's a pattern going here. He says, why don't you build a franchise? I said, I'm an engineer. I know nothing about franchising. And it just so happens, he was in the franchise business, and he was in the hotel franchise business. And not only that, he was like the number one guy for many, many years. He said, let's do it together. You do the self-storage part, I'll do the franchising part. So, and that's how it started. We got all the paperwork together, all the franchise documents together, and then it was time to start. We got a couple people in, and I said, Scott, you take care of the franchising side, and I'll take care of the self-storage side. And he says, we got a problem, Mark. I have a job. I can't afford to work for you. I said, what was this all about then? He says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you my half, the franchise system that we've put together, and you don't charge me to build my first self-storage. So Scott's now a multi-millionaire, happy. I talk to him every few months, happy as he could be. He built a self-storage, sold it for like a $6 million profit 2 years after it opened. And so that's how it started. And we just continue down that path.
That's an awesome story. Very, very cool beginning origin story. Talk to me about your client. Like, who's the person that should reach out to Marc Goodin and talk to him about building a self-storage facility?
Well, typically our client is a professional, like an IT head of the IT department, a lawyer. We've got several dentists, a doctor, a successful business person. Several of our franchisees sold their business, whatever it might be, and have some cash that say, what do I do with it? We had one guy this morning that says, I've got this pile of cash, and all my wife wants to do is she keeps buying stocks and going to Saks Fifth Avenue. I got to find something else to do with my money. And they know nothing about self-storage. And so that they come to us because we offer a full program that includes finding the land, reviewing the land, doing the designs. We're part of that team that gets them through the development. And obviously, that's the value add that's out there right now in self-storage. If you can build it, fill it up, you go from 10% profits to 30% profits. So it's a big value add, but people don't know how to do that. And then we have a manager driven system for operation, sales, and marketing, meaning that the manager is the highest common denominator. Unlike the REITs where it's kind of the lowest common denominators. You call a call center, you don't get the manager. And so that makes a system where these people can keep their careers making income that's the same or more than they're making. I mean, these guys are making side incomes, six-figure side incomes, and they're keeping their jobs at least for a little while. So it's somebody that's willing to keep their job for a little while because the bank wants you to have a job and pay for your living, but once it's up and running, if there's enough profit there, the bank's not going to say nothing. So it's looking people that want to do an alternate investment, typically to the stock market, and they know there's good returns in self-storage.
Have a real asset with a 40, 50-year track record of showing a consistent return. That's not a terrible thing to get into. Interested to ask you about when you talked about this idea that it's confusing. Like there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. I was interestingly enough, a buddy of mine's a marketing guy and somebody who does YouTube videos on self-storage. He sent me to them today, and I'm watching the video and I'm like, man, they're making this sound like anybody can just go buy a self-storage facility. If there's one thing I've learned in 4 years in this industry, anybody shouldn't just buy a self-storage facility. You better understand every aspect of what's happening because there's a bunch of you talked about it: sales, marketing, operations, taxes, insurance. I mean, and that doesn't even talk about the construction process. How have you guys simplified that for your franchisees?
Well, we've simplified it because we have the manuals that explain it to the nth degree. So if you want to look something up, there's a page for it. But we're with them day in, day out. We don't expect them to learn from a manual. That's there for the people that love to read. But in that manual is a step-by-step checklist that we'll meet every Friday at 10 o'clock. How did this go? How did that go? How did that go? It's their business. They own it. They own the land. They own the self-storage. It's much better than McDonald's where you only own the business and you don't own the land. So here we're there to help them. We have an experienced, proven track record. I'm a civil engineer, a professional engineer. I did that career for 30 years. I understand wetlands. I understand topography. I understand traffic, so I understand that. And, I do market my self-storages. I charge 40% more than my competition in the 25-mile radius, and every radius smaller than that, 40% more than my competition, just to prove to the rest of the world it can be done. Convenience is the number one. You have to really understand that if somebody walks into your office, 90% of the time they're going to rent with you if they say to themselves, hey, it feels good here. It looks good. It smells good.
I Yeah, I love that idea, right? In the residential real estate market, they always say somebody's made the decision to buy the house before they even walk in the front door, right? The feeling they get when they see that place from the sidewalk and what it looks like is going to be really important in their buying decision. To your point in self-storage, if you don't screw up that process and instead of screwing it up, you make it very clear that this is a place that someone feels safe and comfortable and they're going to be happy to come visit. It's not always price that's driving that decision.
Yeah, price does not drive that decision. It used to back 30 years ago, but now after COVID, price doesn't track like it used to. People say, life is too short. I'm only going to stay at this self-storage for 2 months. It's near my home. I love it. It looks good. And they rent and they stay 2 years. So, we design our self-storages. So when they drive by, they say, wow, you know, every one of our self-storages has a 50-foot American flag out front. Every one of our self-storages has a commercial vacuum cleaner that you'd see at the car wash. That's free to anybody that wants to come in and use it. So we want them to say wow when they drive by. We want them to say wow when they're driving in the driveway and parking. And when they open the door, we want them to say wow. I mean, we have a full service candy bar, coffee bar, soda bar at every self storage. It's not that much more expensive. We don't build a Taj Mahal. We just build it simple, clean, and something where people can say, see how we are different. You've got to be different, otherwise you're going to be like a gas station. You're going to be a commodity if you're not different and you don't know how to market that difference.
I read a book recently about marketing and sales, and it referenced a hotel out in Los Angeles that's got like 5,000 5-star ratings. And you go to the hotel and it's like, looks like a 3-star hotel. But if you're sitting at the pool, you can pick up a phone and call the front desk and they'll bring you any candy bar that you ask for. Right. And so like these little things that they do that are value add to the customer that just resonate, right? They leave an impression in that person's mind that this is a place I want to be, which is really fascinating to me that you guys have really brought this into storage. Certainly not an industry that's known for those little fancy extras by any stretch of the imagination. I want to talk to you a little bit about, 2024, obviously the big word of the year was AI and technology, which is starting to be more and more brought into the self-storage industry. We're seeing a lot of, especially smaller facilities, 40,000 and below, that are being run fully remote now. How are you guys seeing technology impact storage authority, and what's your view of implementing technology into your stores?
Well, we do implement technology. It's got to be high touch, high tech. But to say a facility runs remotely, it does not. I see all these things, but who goes and cleans up that site, the trash that's left? Who goes to see that somebody didn't move out so we don't charge their credit card? Who goes to overlock that system? Unless you paid 200,000 extra to build your system, you've got to put on that red lock. Who break their key off in the middle of winter? Who takes care of that? So on a big facility, I did the math. It takes 16 to 20 hours to do that kind of stuff. You know, so if you hire a manager, they do that stuff. And for 20 hours, if you just want to keep it 35 hours a week, and for that extra 20 hours, that's all you're paying is somebody for 20 hours a week to be a full service high touch. Every one of our facilities has the kiosk code there. It has a vestibule with a with a a machine there, the kiosk that you can rent from. But you got to take it. You got to have the high touch if you want to charge premium rates. I get it. You get a facility that's very small. It's a different story. But I'm talking about an average facility that's 60 to 70,000 net rentable. Um,
You
you
guys are building
use all that
Class A storage.
technology, but you need that person in the office if you want to charge more than the competition.
Yeah, I love that. A couple things I want to touch on. I'm going to rewind a little bit because there's something I meant to ask you and I didn't. Banking for the folks that are doing this. Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways you can finance a storage facility. What's the typical route you guys are going down with these franchisees to get the financing to go build a facility?
Yeah, and we've never had a self storage denied at the banking level or the design level. Each one is unique. The guy that I mentioned this morning that we're having a call with tomorrow, he's going to be self funded the entire way. At least he has that ability to. And we might explain to him how that works. At some point, you want to refinance and use that money again. Um, a lot of people, a lot of our franchisees actually go the SBA route, because with the SBA route, you need about a third as much of the money as you would at a bank. SBA allows 15% down typically, and they fund a lot of the development design costs, and they fund a lot of the carrying costs. You go to a traditional bank, that carrying cost and the design costs, it can start approaching $1 million. and that also includes, the expense, paying the expenses until you open. That's another $1 million. And banks want 30 to 50% down.
Yeah.
They say 30%, but I've seen it over and over, 40 and 50% down, for new construction. I mean,
Heard a lot of that yesterday, like 55, 60% loan to value from traditional banks right now. Getting to 70% is a challenge.
right. But once you're open and you're full, the banks, I refinanced just for I said, oh, can you give me 3 years interest only? Self-storage is all about cash flow into my pocket. And he said yes. I didn't expect him to say yes. I thought I'd just ask. So
Yeah.
they know self-storage is a safe business. Um, we have a little advantage because when people come with us, it gives them a track record. They know that we're going to be watching it during construction. They know we've got a system in place. And so they know they're actually getting a team. So that makes financing a little easier. And even now, SBA asked a bunch of questions. You've got to have good answers to those questions in a bank application. So, um, you
I
know,
was going to say to anyone listening, the process of getting through an SBA loan is a headache. And so having that ability to go to storage authority and have you folks walk someone through that process because you've been through it so many times and have the relationships with the people that provide SBA loans, that's a massive value add to somebody who, obviously they've got a day job. They don't have hundreds of hours to spend, filling out paperwork and answering questions.
well, and people don't realize that an SBA loan goes through 3 reviews before it's approved. One, the bank has to review it. Two, then after the bank reviews it, they send it to a sub consultant of the SBA. He doesn't work for the SBA, but he's hired to make sure it meets all the checklists.
Mhm.
And then that individual brings it to the SBA board, I'll call it. And the SBA board starts challenging him on all these things, you know? And so nowadays when we send an application, not to them, not only do we answer all their typical questions, we also have a section, what if this happens? Because we know they're going to ask that. You know, they're going to ask, how can you charge more? The guy, the REIT is charging $99. Well, we have to explain that's his website price. That's not his overall yearly price.
Yeah.
So we have to explain because they see that, the competition is charging 90 and we're going to charge 120. How can that be? So we have to explain that to the bank. So there is a lot of paperwork that has to be done. Has to be very professional. The cover letter has to have all kinds of information. So the guy that's diving into it is answered, but for the bank president that wants to skim it, he's happy. So banking is a critical issue.
Mark, I'm having so much fun asking you questions about this. I always try and keep this to a half hour to honor your time, especially the people listening. I want to make sure that they have time to digest. I have one more question I want to ask you, though, that fascinates me. You have this full career as a civil engineer. You retire, you could go off and do whatever you like to do in your free time and enjoy your life. What is it that drives you to keep running this business and providing this service to folks?
Well, I retired when I was 50 for 5 years. After 5 years, my wife said, I'm not going fishing with you anymore. I'm not going to do all these things anymore. You got to find something to do. And during those 5 years, I would help, like I said, 2 or 3 people. So it's something that I love to help people. I love to help people build things to be successful. And the success is not about owning stuff. Success is about finding a way to enjoy life, and building a self-storage gives you more time and money. And I just love it, and so it's something that I will do for forever. I will never retire, never. Yeah, I can slow down. I've got team members that can do what I'm not good at, or maybe what I don't feel like doing. um, but it's just something that I will do. It's a business. Storage Authority will go to the next generation of my family, just like my self storages will. So we're excited about it. I'm happy to help people, and it's not like 100 people are going to sign up for Storage Authority tomorrow. So self storage doesn't have emergencies like hotels or apartments. My heat's not working at 12 o'clock at night. So there's no emergencies in self storage. There's no emergencies in the franchise business at self storage. So somebody calls at 3 and happen to be out camping. Well, we've got a team to answer it, or we can answer it the next day. So self storage shouldn't be stressful. And it's just stressful if you don't have that experience, or you don't have the team. So that's the first thing we do, is build a team, and I'm just part of it. So I don't have to do 100%. It's a team of contractors, architects, engineers, banks, and so on. So
I thought I was going to really enjoy this conversation going into it. From what I knew about Storage Authority, it certainly did not let me down in any way. It's been an absolute blast talking to you for the last half hour. Tell me this: if somebody's watching and their interest is piqued, they're a high earning professional and want to get a hold of Storage Authority to talk about the opportunity that you guys have, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you folks?
well, depending on their personality, some people like to go to our website and just take a few hours and review what we do and understand it. And it's the website. I see you got Storage Authority there, but the website they want to go to is storageauthorityfranchise.com.
Got it.
And that will tell them all about the franchise program and what we do. But other people, they're like me. They don't want to wait. They want to have a call. We're ready to do that. They can just send me an email, mark@storageauthority.com, and we'll set up a time for a 10 or 15-minute call. If that works well, we get them a bunch of information for them to review. And then, if they're ready, we do a discovery process. I mean, our goal is to make sure it's a win-win. Unfortunately, we do have to reject a lot of people. It's unbelievable. People want to get in and be charged the least. I get it when you first open, but they want to be the lowest rental rates for forever. We simply won't let those people in. It's not our system. We want to be the Ritz. So we want the highest rates. We want to be the premier with the highest rates. And so, it's a conversation. So
stick to it. I love that.
Yep.
Marc Goodin, CEO, president of Storage Authority. I'm going to say again, thanks so much for taking the time and coming and sharing such a fascinating story. Really cool. 40 years in the storage business. Appreciate you sharing that experience with us.
Thank you, Thaddeus. It's been fun.
An awesome time. I'm going to give one more shout out to my friends at Kiwi 2 Construction, supporting the Stories Behind the Door podcast. Wayne Woolsey and his crew, they're it in the steel structure business. 30 plus years of putting up storage facilities. You can reach out to them at kiwiconstruction.com. Again, I'm Thaddeus Campbell, S3 Partners. He's Marc Goodin, Storage Authority. That's it for this week's episode of Stories Behind the Door.